Ladies and gentlemen, we are live with Tom Nelson. He's a very famous when it comes to woodpeckers, and we'll get to that. But he is a climate denier like myself and many others that we have on the show, and hopefully he will become a friend of the channel. We have him on because we want to spread the word about his work. He's been interviewing some really top names. I shouted out your video from last month from Zarkova on one of my podcasts, and I think you had a bunch of people go over and sub there.
Yes.
Yeah, because of that video. Now, I've been following Zarkova for probably 8 years, and right when she started to do some of her machine learning stuff, some of the earlier papers, it's been a whirlwind because it first came out and it like hit the waves, and then all the climate, the global warmists attacked her, and then she kind of went in a hole, but it seems like she's come back out of the hole, which is good to see. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for giving me the chance.
Yeah, so this is Tom Nelson's Twitter. We're going to link that below. He's got tons of followers over there, like 30,000 plus. So he's definitely doing some good work on the tweet box. But let's talk about how you got started and the woodpecker, because this is a pretty interesting story. So you're not a climate scientist. You're not a geologist. You have a master's in electrical engineering.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, where's that from? From
North Dakota State University in Fargo.
And so I don't know what you're doing. You're also an avid bird watcher, and you might have caught some wind of a peer-reviewed paper on this elusive woodpecker that is almost extinct. It lives in the southeastern forests, one of the biggest woodpeckers in North America. My favorite woodpecker is the pileated, and it looks just like that. So let's tell the audience about, well, the nonsense related to the peer-reviewed paper.
Okay, there was this whole deal in 2005. It actually got a lot of national and worldwide publicity in 2005 when Cornell and some other folks announced that they had rediscovered the ivory-billed woodpecker, which had been last officially seen in the 1940s, I think. And it was just amazing. It came out on NPR and stuff, and people, when they heard this story, they were so overcome with emotion that they would pull to the side of the road and weep and stuff because it was such a big deal. But it was completely bogus. But they had a peer-reviewed paper with 17 people that signed on to it. And but all they had is just very flimsy evidence. They had a blurry video that was kind of like a Bigfoot video. And one of their pieces of evidence was a photo that was a 6-pixel ivory bill. The whole thing was just 6 pixels. And it was just like 4 whites and 2 blacks. And it was just amazing that that flimsy evidence was accepted as evidence that an extinct woodpecker had been rediscovered. Amazing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's the same evidence of the first picture of a black hole, 6 pixels.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. Do you remember that reveal a year ago? Yeah, they had a picture, the first picture of a black hole. They won the Nobel Prize. It was a female, and it was 6 pixels. And out of that 6 pixels, they drew a whole picture of this black hole, like a big torus donut. Complete nonsense. But you were just this outsider, just a citizen scientist, and you called bull on it. And what did you write it up in your blog?
Yeah, I wrote it up in my blog, and then I was a complete nobody. But then a lot of people came on anonymously, and they were just ripping apart the evidence from every possible angle because the evidence, there was nothing there. And that really got me thinking that peer-reviewed science maybe is not necessarily true. Before that, I was more of a believer. But later on, this got written up in a book by some guy from the New York Times called A Bunch of Amateurs, where he talks about how amateur people can wade into these controversies, and they can look at it from an outsider's perspective and find out things that are wrong with the evidence. So it was very satisfying. It took years, but it was a satisfying experience.
Now, I always like to follow the money. So in this case, was the guy trying to claim he found this extinct woodpecker to maybe set up like a zone of protection where no oil and gas or something could happen?
There was something like that. They wanted to prevent, I think, maybe logging in the area. For sure, there were some conservation reasons why they wanted to have the woodpecker live there. And this is not the first time that even happened to the ivory-billed woodpecker. Back, I think, in the 1970s, they also thought they rediscovered it and they were going to save its habitat, etc. So there were some other outside motives. I think some people just wanted to rediscover it so badly that they thought they saw it. They saw stuff flying by, and they probably saw some pileateds flying by, and they thought that was an ivory bill. And once it was officially reported, then other people felt that they might have seen it too because somebody else saw it first. Pretty amazing.
It's pileated?
Yeah, I used to say pileated. I think you can say it either way.
Okay.
Either way is
And
fine. Yeah.
I think I read a paper that suggests that there are some albino pileatids or pileatids that may resemble this extinct.
Yes. Yeah. I've seen pictures of them. I think there may be total albinos, but I've seen pictures of partial albinos that have some white on their wings where it shouldn't be. So that could certainly fool you. And maybe there was one of those flying around in the area, or maybe it's a combination of that. Even if you
Yeah.
see a crow flying by, the wings can look white in the right light. You can get fooled.
Yeah. So these creatures were last spotted in some old growth forest in Arkansas, I believe, in the 40s. And the reason that they went extinct is because in the Southeast, they cut down all the old growth wood for money. And there's like very little stands of it where they could even habitat. So if you're in that area, keep your eye out for an extinct bird.
Yes, I would love it if it was rediscovered, but I think it was not.
Now, Tom, I'm going to pull up your YouTube because you've interviewed. You're pretty. You're a go-getter. You go out there and you interview all of these esoteric people. I mean, they call them fringe scientists. A lot of them are climate deniers or what have you. And a lot of people don't realize that these are real people. They're easy to access in many cases, sometimes hard because they just don't have their stuff out there. And they're happy to talk to you, aren't they?
They are. Yeah. It's been really fun for me to email people like Richard Lindzen and Will Happer and have them say, yeah, I'll do it and get on there. It's been very fun.
Yeah. And it's weird because I often don't get pushback. They don't say like, who are you? Like, am I about to expose them or something?
No, it's fun.
All right. So you got about 1,000 subscribers up here on your YouTube. How long have you been doing this?
I think I started in July. I did Chris Smart. So it's my first interview in July. I just hit interview number 50 today. So
Chris Smart's the young weatherman.
Yeah, he's a very smart young guy that has really ripped in or checked into this evidence. He knows what's going on weather-wise, and he's good at checking out the claims and seeing what's real and what's not. He does a real nice job.
But unfortunately, he's now believing slightly in CO2 affecting global climate because he's at university.
Well, yeah, I talked to him about that, and he said really at his view, it hasn't been that bad. I thought it would be all people that were all in on it, but he said it hasn't been that bad.
Now, you just interviewed Valentina Zarkova. I haven't had her on the show because I find her particularly difficult to listen to. It's a lot of people with heavy accents, people just turn them off. And so it would be unfortunate if I did an interview, it probably only get a few thousand views. And I don't like to do that because it discredits the scientists. You know, if they come and look and they're wondering, how come nobody watched this? So I didn't want to put her in that position, but you interviewed her and it was a great interview. What did you think about what she had to say?
Yeah, I thought it was super interesting. And actually, as far as the accent goes, I watched them all the second time with the captions on. That really helps for me to absorb what they're actually saying.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yep. So I thought it was very, very good. She said some of the same things I've heard on some of the other interviews, but yeah, I loved it. I thought the whole idea of the distance from the sun as being a big deal was a very interesting one.
Well, and as I've brought up on other podcasts that I've done over the years, maybe for about 4 years, the big reveal came out when we were going into solar cycle 24. All the solar scientists and plasma physicists were predicting solar cycle 24 was going to be huge. 99.5% of them got it wrong, but she did not. She said it was going to be the weakest cycle in over 100 years, and she nailed it. Very few did. And yet she's almost discredited daily for any activity she does.
Yeah, I don't know what to think about that. And I'm not sure what you think of her predictions for the next cycles. I'm hearing predictions all across the board, and you probably have a better handle on that than me as to which one of those is going to be correct for the next cycles.
Well, the predictions for cycle 25 were much larger than 24. Okay. And even in the last 6 months, some of the most recent articles and even papers coming out, they were saying things like cycle 25 is the largest ever in history. Well, but when you go to a simple solar cycle comparison chart, that's not what's happening. Cycle 25 is mimicking 24 at best and is just slightly more energetic.
Okay. All right. I am seeing quite a few of the people that I've interviewed suggesting that overall the Earth may cool a little bit between now and 2050, but I don't think anybody knows for sure what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think, well, based on the phase cancellation that Zarkova shows using machine learning, which has the most detailed data sets of the sun, they're not just using like total solar irradiance or something. She's using both of the magnetic field, positive and negative changes. And I think that her information is probably the most comprehensive, and you should go with what she says, that this cycle coming up, 26, will be the null set, so to speak. So we're going to have a weak cycle here. The weakest cycle will start in maybe 5-6 years and last for a decade. Weak cycles tend to be longer or shorter historically. So it could be a 9-year or a 13-year cycle. But if it is the grand minima bottom, because the solar grand minima usually lasts 40 to 80 years, so that's going to be 4 to 8 solar cycles, we could be in for it, because if it gets cold for a decade, it's going to stay that way. It doesn't recover easily.
Okay. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. And during these cold solar cycles, you tend to see the breakdown of weather systems that have never been seen before. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the meridional flow that's been very pervasive over the last few years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's often associated with the fact that the waning magnetosphere is breaking down the zonal flow of the jet stream and making it wander, so to speak. And that's when you can get all these extremes where Arctic air hits the equator and we get tropical air pushing up in the Arctic. But at the same time, what the disingenuous global warmists don't realize when they say things like the Arctic is heating up 5 times faster than everywhere else is that when the magnetic field wanes, we have more cosmic energy coming into the aurora belt, and it actually heats the upper atmosphere, which actually heats the Arctic. So you get heating in the poles, but you get cooling in the mid latitudes.
Okay. And overall, that results in less extreme weather, doesn't it?
It should be, because you're absorbing that energy up in the polar regions. I guess in the polar regions, you could get more extreme weather.
Okay.
But overall, the system. But what you do get is increased hail size as the magnetic field weakens, and you get increased, what else? Cloud nucleation, right? The work of Svensmark.
Yes.
Weaker magnetic field, more cloud nucleation, and then you get the albedo effect and the Earth cools. It's a mini ice age effect. So weakening magnetosphere, you can have a mini ice age. Another thing I've been finding when you look at the Vostok data is that a lot of times when we have impacts, the temperature on Earth for decades or centuries cools after. And I wonder if it's dust up in the ionosphere or something like that. You know, like a major volcanic eruption will cool the Earth for several years. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know. That makes me think of one of my guests. I don't know which one it was. Maybe a couple of them talked about the year without a summer around 1815 or 1816.
Yeah.
I think, I've read some historical records of that, of just how tough those times were, because in some places you couldn't grow crops for you skipped a year. So people were starving to death, etc.
So that was the eruption of Tambora.
Yes. Yeah.
In 1815. And the year without a summer was 1816?
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah. It was really tough times. Many
this
places
occurred. So this occurred during the Dalton minimum, when we were just like a minimum we're going in now. You're at a low solar cycle. So you already have meridional flow where anything can happen. And then if you accentuate that by blasting all this material, this dust up there, and it just cools the planet by a half or a degree. People don't understand that if you cool the planet 1 degree C, some areas will be 20 degrees colder. Do you know what I mean? It's not that it's just 1 degree colder outside.
Yeah, they were talking about frost in June in places where they're trying to grow crops, and it was too damp and too cold to grow a crop, and people were trying to live off of last year's corn, and they were eating stuff that wasn't even necessarily food. It was really tough. Yeah. Yeah.
There were even glacial advances during these minimums, like Dalton minimum with the Tambora eruption. The glaciers on intermontane glaciers grew for years.
I think I heard that there was some church where they were praying for the glacier to not overtake the church and crush it.
Yeah, because it had been moving towards it for decades. It literally consumed buildings. These glaciers during the Maunder minimum consumed buildings in Europe. And it freaked out the people, because you have a bunch of Christian religious people living in the countryside. They think God's angry at them.
Right. And then I should bring up, you probably heard during other cold periods that witches were burned. Like lots of people were burned as witches. And it was related to the fact that there were crop failures, and they had to blame bad weather on people that they didn't like. So It was a blessed thing, or whatever the elites were saying. Killing witches was the thing to do, and it worked because the weather got better later.
Yeah, David Dubine talks a lot about that. Who else? Let me ask you, who has your favorite interview been as of yet? And I see you got Tony Heller to come on the show, Richard Lindzen. We already said Willie Soon. Who was your favorite?
Yeah, it's really hard to pick one favorite. There's so many good ones. Patrick Moore was really good up there. Mark Morano was fantastic. Yeah, I love listening to Tony Heller, as you said. Will Happer wasn't yet on your list. Christopher Monkton was another one.
Oh yeah,
Henrik Svensmark, and it's been very, very fun. I've enjoyed all of them, I would say.
And so you've only had this channel for a short period of time, and it's growing pretty well.
Yeah, it's growing. I'm hoping that being on your show helps it grow a little bit more. But yeah,
well, you got 33,000 followers. You should be blasting your videos up on your Twitter. You're doing that, correct?
I'm doing that, but I have heard that they don't show your tweets to people as much when you include a YouTube link on them. I'm not sure. I've heard that, but I tweet out the links. I like to tweet out quotes. For most of the videos, I'll tweet out maybe 5 or 10 key quotes that came from the video.
Yeah, because and you can also do clips. Do a 45-second clip you can put up there.
Yeah. And one interesting thing, you have my Richard Lindzen video up there at the top. That I don't know, it got a couple thousand views or something on the YouTube video. But I tweeted out clips and quotes on Twitter, and those got a huge number of views. I believe one of the tweets featuring his quote got 800,000 views of the tweet. So I'm getting way more, I think, getting the message out on Twitter rather than just straight from YouTube.
Yeah, many of my viewers only get notification of my videos because before they premiere, I put it out on my socials. So I put it out on Facebook and Twitter, and they only come to the premiere because they see it pop up on Twitter. YouTube does not notify 80,000 people there's a video coming, and it's insane.
Yeah, even though they're supposed to, right? I've heard that if you're suppressed, that they don't send out notifications if they're supposed to. Okay.
Yeah, they're supposed to. Yeah. Why wouldn't they be? I mean, it's weird because they're already stealing huge amounts of revenue from the ads that I put up on my videos. Probably they get 75%. And then on things like super chats, they get over 25% of that money.
Really?
Yeah. And then you got PayPal and everybody taking a piece of the pie.
Not good.
All the way down the chain. And now if you move more than $500 around PayPal, you're going to get audited.
Is that right? $500 now.
Something like that. There's a low threshold. So who's up on deck for your next interviews?
Who is up on deck? Terry Gannon is one. I'll have to take a look. I don't know who's on deck, but I do.
Who's Terry Gannon?
Terry Gannon is just another one of the lesser known climate skeptics. I think he is a contact of Willie Soon. I forget. But
have you gotten on Willie's mailing list?
Yes. Yeah.
Are you on it? Hammers you. Yeah. He hammers you with papers and everything.
Yeah. Who else? Yeah. I have Julie Kelly coming up. I think she's more of a journalist. I've had people who are more into the science, or some people are journalistic or into the media. And Julie Kelly is tomorrow. Yeah.
A really good and very popular person in our circles is Jennifer Murrow-Hassey and the entire Australian contingent of climate deniers. She's easy to get to, and she's been publishing some amazing documentary films about things like Porites and other corals, where the peer-reviewed literature, once again, is full of bullshit. And so these people don't even go out into the reef. They write a paper by sending drones over or airplanes. And then she's like, wait a minute, I was just there. And then they go out and they dive and find the exact opposite of what the paper says.
Exactly. I've seen a lot of that. All right. I do have my list here. I have Matthew Walicki up. He's a guy I just discovered that's been doing a lot of videos and doing a lot of speaking about climate skepticism. So I'm excited to have him. There's a James McGinn from Solving Tornadoes. William Briggs is coming on. Jerome Corsi. I mentioned Terry Gannon. William Van Wijngaarden. I don't know how to pronounce his name. He's coming up. And then Jasper Makagu. He's a guy from Kenya who's only been a skeptic for 2 years, but he's absolutely brilliant. He's a former Greenpeace guy who's flipped over to our side. I'm super happy to have him on. David Legates is the other one that I have currently listed. So
I interviewed Patrick Moore at that the International Climate Conference in Vegas. And during the interview, he's like, I should be interviewing you.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah, he's a nice guy and doing great work and putting himself out there to get attacked because he is one of the former founders of Greenpeace. And they, in fact, removed it from the Wikipedia. He's not even mentioned as having anything to do with Greenpeace, I think. He's been, he's been canceled.
He's been airbrushed out just like the Soviets used to do. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard him speak in person. He came to Minnesota here one time, and he is really fun to listen to. He's so knowledgeable, and he rips apart the climate narrative in so many different ways. It's great.
So why I asked you, would you put yourself out there, Tom Nelson, to be attacked and ridiculed? I mean, I've had death threats. People have come. A person actually came to my house to try to kill me, stalk me for months, and things like that. I mean, why put yourself out there?
I just think it's the right thing to do. I'm very, very interested in the whole thing. I've been tearing into this narrative for about 15 plus years now, and I really enjoy doing it every day. And I just like being on the right side of the science. And so I feel like I've been down every rabbit hole in terms of the climate debate about crop yields and tornadoes and whatever, all floods and droughts, fires, etc. And I just really enjoy sanity checking all the crazy claims against real life. And I do it because I think it's so incredibly important. Because people are using this crisis narrative to do so many evil things, like cutting off energy to the developing countries. Totally evil to try to not finance any sort of real power plants for people in Africa, for example, people who need reliable power for their hospitals, et cetera. And we're trying to do them a favor by not letting them power their hospitals with fossil fuels. It's the whole thing. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I really think we should fight it tooth and nail.
Yeah, and it's just not third world countries. Europe is stabbing itself in the foot. We're going into winter, and there are there's just very worrying signs about things that could happen this winter in places like Germany. And even here in Texas, we almost lost the grid for an extended period of time a few years ago when a bunch of things line up. So when the shit does hit the fan in Europe this winter and people go cold, then they will learn.
Yeah, I was hearing quite a while ago now that the price of firewood in Germany was up by a factor of 10, and it was hard to find a chainsaw. People are trying to cut wood to heat their house. And then there's
it's probably like illegal to cut wood too in Germany.
It probably is. Yeah, and then there's this whole thing in the Netherlands where they're trying to use this nitrous oxide climate scare to seize 3,000 farms, just take away the farms. It's amazing.
I think that they actually took away the farm.
It's looking like it. Yeah. So it's happening, like you say. It's not even in developing countries. It's everywhere. So we got to fight it.
And this is the question everyone needs to be asked. Why are they doing it?
I don't know what's going on in their heads, but it is a great way to seize political power. I think Richard Lindzen has some quote that if you control CO2, you can control anything. So it seems like it's all about power.
We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the mining capability to implement this green technology in any fashion. And if we start doing it now, which we are, to create the infrastructure actually uses more oil and gas than if we just use oil and gas. That's the mind-blowing thing. They have these things called biofuel plants that are green energy, where they're clear-cutting forests to create electricity. And the green movement supports the clear cutting of old growth forests to make electricity because we're not polluting with plant food. The world has gone mad.
It absolutely has gone mad. And I'm sure you're probably talked on your channel about the whole ethanol thing, about just how crazy it is having all these cornfields and burning, I don't know, what is it, 40% of the U.S. corn crop for fuel? Completely
you wouldn't want to eat that corn crop because it's all genetically modified and covered in glyphosate. So
maybe we should burn it.
Better burn it, in my opinion. But I think that hopefully, now are you a catastrophist, and do you follow any of the stuff we talk about on the channel with?
I have not. I probably should. I probably should be ready for the things that may be coming up. But yeah, I have been concentrating on this other stuff and not so much on being prepared for bad stuff that's coming.
Yeah, well, all we really recommend is that you learn how to become self-reliant, because just in the instance of, let's say, the power goes off indefinitely, what are you going to do? If you have no skills, or you don't know how to cook food or wild harvest or something, if there's no more stores to go to, a lot of people, because in the last 100 years, we were in 1900 in the US, we were 90% getting our food from our yards. We were agrarian. We were hunters and farmers. And today that number is like 2%. In fact, 1% of the population of the US grows food for 400 million people. That should worry you.
That is amazing. Yeah. I was going to ask you a question about self-sufficiency. Oh, I was going to ask you about the solar flares, actually. I was just watching a video of yours. Is it true that one of those solar flares that knock out our electronics could happen at any time? Or would we have some warning, do you think, if that were to come?
If it's a big enough solar, if it's a big enough sunspot, we would see it come around the limb. We would see it flaring before it's pointing at Earth. So that takes about 14 days to get across the whole front of the disk. It's about 28 days around one rotation of the sun. So you'd have about 7 days to see it until it was directly Earth facing. But if it started flaring 5 days later, it would be close enough facing Earth, it'd start hitting us. So we would see it flaring as it came. But if a big, like an X100 came off, we would only have 6 or 8 hours before infrastructure starts frying. And then when the actual plasma front hits 12, 16 hours later, that's when everything would charge. And then it's probably not just going to be like one flare. If you have a big sunspot, it typically just doesn't go boom. It's a series of flares, like. So like the Carrington event lasted for 48 or 72 hours when it hit the geomagnetic storm. That's probably because it was multiple solar flares, over a period of minutes or hours. Mm-hmm. A large solar flare can come up, a long duration solar flare, and last. I've seen some M and X flares last for 6 to 12 hours, just the flare on the up and down. Mm-hmm. So a bigger event could last for 24 or 36 hours during the whole event, I think.
Okay.
And so, and just having 6 or 7 hours warning, what are you going to do? Go to Walmart? What would you do?
Yeah, given that much time, I don't know what I would do.
Because there was an X9 that happened 5 years ago, and I woke up, I saw it, I got in the truck, I withdrew $500, I bought $500 worth of oil and sugar, and I had carts, and people were just looking at me. I was like, I have a restaurant.
So historically, what are the chances of one of those really bad ones hitting in any given year? I have no idea how far apart they've occurred. Is it 200 years?
I just did the most recent update I did looked at all the recent findings in peer-reviewed literature on major super flares. And so there are 5 that we know of, and the Carrington event. The Carrington event was in 1859. And the 5 we know of in the Holocene, which are all within the last 9,000 years, are hundreds or thousands of times bigger than the Carrington event. So that means that there are thousands of Carrington events happening in the last 10,000 years. And that there are 5 super flare events that are 1,000, or they even suspect 100,000 times bigger. An X100,000 solar flare could have occurred 7100 BC. 9,200 years ago, there is an event they just found in the ice that is bigger than the Charlemagne event, which is estimated. Well, that actually changed the carbon-14 on Earth by 14%. The Carrington event only changed the carbon-14 production by 0.1%. So the Charlemagne event was 140 times bigger than the Carrington or more. And then this new event they found at 9,200 BC, which is right before a 1,500-year cooling where the temperature drops 8°C. And all of these super flares also correspond to long periods of what we refer to as the Dark Age in history. So this 660 BC event was followed by a dark age. 774 AD was the end of the Roman Empire and everything else. And then it got a dark age after that. So these flare events result in dark ages in our history. And we've had 5 super flares, which are all 100 times bigger than the Carrington event in 9,000 years. You can do the math there, Tom. There's a very high probability that this can happen whenever.
Okay. So that is a major impetus for what you're doing there, right? To be completely self-sufficient. It is that.
Yeah. Because even if we have a small event like a Carrington event, it will fry the grid indefinitely for years.
For years. I mean, how do you see it playing out?
If there was an X100 or something like that, and it was directly Earth facing, once the energy comes in, it charges the ground, the telluric currents. So any of the areas that are under particularly mafic or granitic or basement rock, like the entirety of New England, those areas would fry first and hardest. Areas like Quebec on the Canadian Shield already had issues back in 1989. So you're going to see major cities fry first, and then the grid cascades out of control. But even when the electricity is off and our grid is fried, energy coming in from the sun for that continuous period of time continues to charge all of the wires that still exist, and they could light things on fire. So we're going to see lots of fires. All the transformers will explode catastrophically and probably light fires locally. The transformers that are up on your streets will explode and maybe light fires beneath them. If you don't shut the power off to your house, it could surge and your house, the walls could light on fire. Because we have reports from the Carrington event that even after they turned the telegraph machines off, they continued to operate, and the guys thought that it was haunted. It freaked them out. They were unplugging the batteries and they're still operating. They could communicate with other people on the lines, and that must have creeped them out. At the same time, their telegraph papers lighting on fire. I mean, can you imagine what it would be like today?
Interesting. But all the effects are on the electrical stuff, right? So if we didn't have electricity, what else would happen? Like life on Earth is okay beyond the electricity?
No, I don't think
no?
so.
No?
All the reasons why we were caveman, the reasons why underground cities like Cappadocia exist and dolmens, and the reason the megafauna didn't make it on the Younger Dryas event is if you go outside and you have to, if you're an apex predator that needs to eat constantly, or like a horse that needs to be grazing on grass 24 hours a day, those are the ones that died for the most part, because they were out and exposed to whatever cosmic radiation is coming in the whole time. If you were outside and you noticed your hair falling out, you'd run inside, Tom, or you'd run underground and you'd stay there and maybe sneak out at night. So I believe that that's how people survive. They know that they can't go outside at certain times and they hide.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, this is a eye opener for me.
Yeah. So, but then there's all kind of gradations of what is the event. Is it an X20, an 50, an 80, 100? If it's an X1000, it's like, doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No one knows what happens there. But paleontologically, there hasn't been a major extinction event with any of these solar flares in the Holocene. So that means that most things live.
Okay. Have there been any eruptions that have been big enough to just knock out a little bit of our electronics? Anything like that?
From the sun?
Yeah. Anything like that?
There was an X45 on November 4th, 2003. A big solar flare came out, didn't do much as it crossed, and right as it turned away around the limb and was facing away from the Earth, just about 2 hours after the entire spot faced away, it shot off a flare, X45, measured on Earth, which means it was much bigger. That's what we measured on Earth as it shot away from Earth. So had that been facing us, we wouldn't be on YouTube. There would be no electricity. We would be cooking over a fire right now.
And what were the chances that would have shot off facing us? Is it? That makes
what do you mean, the chances?
Well, let's see. I don't even know how fast the sun is rotating.
14 days the spot took to go all the way across.
Yeah.
And then after it turned around the limb, it's when it fired.
Okay. I mean, was it anywhere near a 1 in 14 chance that it would have knocked out our electronics, or was it more like 1 in 200?
I don't know the chance. If it was facing us and it fired, there's a 100% chance we would not be on YouTube.
Yeah.
There's a 100% chance. If there's an X100 flare that shoots at Earth, the grid will not make it.
Okay.
And not only that, the amount of charging in our upper atmosphere, what you're going to have is a meteor storm. It's going to be all the hundreds of thousands of satellites re-entering.
Oh, re-entering. Okay. All right.
Yeah, they'll all burn up.
What can we do ahead of time about this? Do we have any electronics that are shielded somehow so that they would survive through this, or no?
What's the purpose is what I always say. The only thing that you would want to have is something that you could use locally. Once the whole infrastructure grid fails, there's no communications. It doesn't matter. There's not going to be any satellite TV or cable. What you might want is to charge electrical things on your property. So if you have generators or batteries or solar panels, you could probably protect them in a Faraday cage, but a large enough event, I don't think anything on the surface would be protected. It'd have to be underground and well shielded, which is why trillions of dollars are missing from governments. governments worldwide are underneath the earth in deep underground military bases. Billionaires are building bunkers currently where they can sustain themselves for decades without ever coming to the surface. These are the known knowns, Tom.
Okay. All right. So companies that have all this data, are they backing up their stuff and putting it underground so that it survives one of these events? I'm curious.
I don't know. Like, what would you need to? You want to keep your tax records because the IRS will come back? I mean, like, what's the purpose of anything? The only thing that you would like we stockpile is we have thousands of books, textbooks on all the sciences and all kind of important hard copy stuff. Like, if you have a bunch of thumb drives, that might not make it. So a book will make it. My books will make it if they don't burn up. But the most important thing, Tom, is skills, because the majority of people, 95% of the population, doesn't know how to hunt, doesn't know how to fish, doesn't know how to wild harvest, doesn't know how to cook their own food. They don't know how to do anything that allows them to survive. You know, they get all their food from the store. They buy it fast food, or they go to the restaurant. It's amazing how many people don't know how to cook anything.
Right, right. But I saw you had some chickens on your video. Your chickens would survive and you could use them as a food source?
Yeah, we produce eggs here. We don't eat the chickens. We produce hundreds of eggs per week. We also raise pork, organic pork. I have hundreds of pounds of meat in box freezers that if the power goes out, we'd all have to cook it once, clearly. But we also live in a really rural area, one of the most remote areas in the United States with the darkest skies and one of the largest herd of elk. So we've got 14 million elk near us and very few people. So we're not going to run out of food.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And you could cook over wood and you'd be fine. Yeah.
Limitless firewood here in the South San Juans.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where are you at?
I'm in Minnesota near the Twin Cities.
Say it ain't soda.
Yeah, I have the accent, you can tell. But
yeah, that's one of my funny lines in my updates.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Is there anything you want to tell people to go out and check out your YouTube, check out your Twitter, check out his blog spot at tomnelsonblogspot.com. I'll link that below the video.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. So thank you for having me on the show. I learned a lot talking to you. I love it.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Tom. Keep up the good work, and hopefully we'll have you on soon.
All right. Talk to you next time. Thank you. Yep. Goodbye.